All right, welcome back to the Soul Hoops channel. I'm coming at you today with a solo video. And the reason for that is because I will be out of town this next week. Jeff and Matthias do have something planned to come out on Thursday or Friday, but I will not be featured in it. So this is kind of my way of making up for that, I guess. And today we will be doing a off-season tier list of each of the 30 teams. They're going to be in a tier, either A, B, C, D, or need more time based on how their offseason has gone. And what I mean by offseason is I mean really three things. I'm going to be grading each team based on how they drafted, how they traded, and how they spent. So drafting, did they maximize the value out of their picks? Did they, did they draft well at the top? Did they find some sleeper picks at the bottom? Did they completely overshoot for a guy that should have gone lower? Stuff like that. And then trades, right? Like, did they maximize the incoming value that they are getting back for the assets they sent out? And then for how well they spent, I mean, how well did they use their money on the open market? Did they bring back the guys they needed to? Did they let go of the guys they needed to? All of that. So, without further ado, we can just kind of get into it. So the first team is the Atlanta Hawks. And with the Atlanta Hawks, I feel like their offseason was pretty inoffensive, or it should be to most, right? I mean, when I think of the Atlanta Hawks offseason, I do think of the John Collins trade, which was definitely bad, right? They should have traded him a few years ago when his value was still higher, because at certain points in time, I feel like they could have gotten like a first-round pick or multiple first-round picks, or maybe even a young player, like a player with real potential for him. Instead, they let his value go down so low to where all they got was Rudy Gay and a second-round pick. So that's not great. But then you also look at the other things they did this summer, right? They got Kobe Buffkin in the draft, who is someone I'm a bit high on, but also there are still question marks about, right? Like when we get those guys who are who in their second year of college kind of shoot up the draft stock rankings like pretty fast, usually you want to be a little bit apprehensive about those guys because there's no sure way of knowing if the hype in their second year was real or whether they're just going to fall short in the NBA. We've seen a similar thing with James Bouknight over in Charlotte, and I don't know. There are still question marks about Kobe Buffkin that we need to see, but I'm a bit high on him. I think he can really fit in there. But then again, they've got two guards. And speaking of one of the guards, DeJounte Murray, I think bringing back DeJounte Murray on that super team-friendly deal is a huge W for Atlanta. I mean, DeJounte Murray is a really, really good player. We just talked about it in the last Soul Hoops episode 4, where we ranked the top 10 shooting guards. DeJounte Murray is still a really good player. They got him on a long-term deal for not very much money, relatively. So Atlanta Hawks are a tricky one. They're definitely in the middle of the pack. I am more inclined to give them a B. Let's put them in B for now. They could definitely move down just based on kind of all the other teams and where they stack up. But I think B is fair because I'm just a big fan of the DeJounte Murray trade, or not the trade, but the signing. The John Collins trade was definitely poorly handled. But at this point, they kind of backed themselves into that corner. And yeah, I mean, at least they got rid of him. At least they didn't hold on to him for another year and his value would go down even more. But next we have Brooklyn. Brooklyn had a pretty quiet offseason, I'd say. They really didn't make a ton of splashes or big moves that really kind of jump off the page. Thinking about their trades, they got rid of Joe Harris, who I think kind of needed to go. He was there for a long time. They brought in, I think, Lonnie Walker in free agency, who I think is a good piece, brings bench scoring, backup guard. I think he can fit in really nice. And the draft wasn't that, eye-popping either. They got Whitehead, who I think was, pretty renowned in high school, but kind of fell in the rankings a little bit. I think he can be a pretty good player. Yeah, I don't think there's too much to talk about the Nets. Oh, they did bring back Cam Johnson. They paid him a lot, but I think Cam Johnson's worth it because he's tall and he can shoot and he can defend. And those are good skills to have in the modern NBA. And every team has to spend their money. So why not bring back a guy like Cam Johnson who can help the team? So I think Brooklyn is definitely going to go in. I don't know. I honestly would feel better about just creating a row above. We can call this S. Oh, wait, no. Hold on. I think that B should be kind of just in the middle as far as this goes. So that'll be S. Then we have Boston. Boston is a tricky one just because I don't know what it's going to look like next season with Marcus Smart off the team. I think trading him was a big mistake, actually. I'm very worried about a team which has already had a lot of playmaking struggles, getting rid of their best playmaker for a guy who doesn't do any playmaking at all. And we've talked about this also on I think the first episode where we talked about our off-season winners and losers. I had Boston as a loser then. I still have Boston as a loser now. I think Porzingis has a chance to really impact this team at a high level, but there's a lot of ifs there. I mean, he never stays healthy. He's always hurt. He can only play one style defensively, which is like a deep drop. He can't switch at all, which is kind of what they've been doing for the last few years, is kind of switching everything. And Marcus Smart kind of played that pretty well. Also, Porzingis, he doesn't really fit any positional needs. They already have Al Horford and Robert Williams, and they're adding another center in there. I would have liked that trade for Boston a lot more if they had included Malcolm Brogdon originally instead of Marcus Smart, but that fell through because of Brogdon's physical and LA, and they threw in Marcus Smart instead. And I don't know. I guess I've talked about this like a bunch of times, but I don't really like the way Boston handled their offseason. Also, losing Grant Williams, I think, is really going to hurt them, and it's gonna reveal itself. I mean, this team is not as deep as it was last year already, and I think it's going to reveal itself to be pretty thin, especially as it goes through the season. And there's still a ton of players in this team that have injury concerns, right? Robert Williams can never stay healthy. Al Horford is getting up there in age. He can miss a lot of time. Malcolm Brogdon's always injured. And Porzingis is another guy who's always going to be hurt. I worry about them. I really do worry about them. I think Boston is going to go into a D for now. Yeah, I think that feels right for Boston. Maybe a C. Yeah, I'll give him a C because I do think the Porzingis thing has a pretty high chance of working out for them. It's just I don't really know what that team is going to look like in the playoffs, and I don't really know what that's going to do for the locker room. But yeah, again, I've gone over this before. Check out the first episode of Soul Hoops, episode 1, to hear more about that because we go pretty in depth in Boston's offseason. Next, we have the Charlotte Hornets, who also have had maybe not a quiet offseason because they did have the number 2 overall pick, but an offseason that also doesn't really pop off the page as being particularly eventful. I think a lot of people were wishing that Charlotte had picked Scoot Henderson instead of Brandon Miller, and I think that caused definitely some noise about it. But I think that Brandon Miller is already overhated, and he hasn't even played a single game yet. Like, it's weird how people treat him. I think people treat him as if he's going to be like some bum, and I don't really see that at all. I think Brandon Miller is going to be a really good player. Does Scoot Henderson have the higher ceiling? I would say so, and I think most would say so. You could also argue he has the lower floor, or no, the higher floor. I think both would argue that Scoot Henderson has the higher floor than Brandon Miller. But, I mean, Charlotte's right. Brandon Miller does fit a positional need, which is depth on the wing, and I think he can be really good next to LaMelo Ball getting him open. So there's that. And also, they did bring back Miles Bridges, who has had quite the eventful last year, I guess. I mean, he wasn't on the team at all last year, so it'll be interesting to see how he is reincorporated with the team, and whether they want to keep him on the team long term, given everything that's happened with that situation, obviously off the court. But yeah, I mean, Charlotte, I feel like inoffensive isn't the right word for their offseason because to a lot of people, I think their offseason has been pretty bad, but I'm willing to give them the benefit of the doubt and put them at a higher grade. I really do think like B is a good place for Charlotte, just because I feel like they weren't that bad this summer. Chicago, however, I just don't really know what their plan is. I don't even think they know what their plan is. I'm going to put Chicago in C just because they're running it back with the same team that is going to max out as like an eighth seed or seventh seed at the very max, and that's if everything goes right for them. They re-signed Vucevic, which I think is fine, right? They didn't pay him that much, like 20 million a year. I think it was 3 years, 60 million. That kind of contract in the current landscape of the money that's being generated by this league is relatively small for a player who's still pretty good. I mean, Vucevic, yeah, that trade, the trade to get Vucevic has been kind of a disaster for Chicago so far, but Vucevic is still a really good player, and I think that's a fine. Bringing back Kobe White is, I think, a pretty big, underrated little move for them. Kobe White had his best year last year, and losing him for nothing would kind of suck. However, they did bring in a lot of other guards. I mean, they brought in Javon Carter, Chicago native, who I think, Javon Carter's a really good player, but I don't really know if I don't know how he fits with Chicago's team. They also brought in Ayo Dosunmu, who's another point guard, and we'll see what that looks like for him. We talked about him in, I think, the last episode 4, where we ranked the shooting guards too. So we have a little bit more to say about that also. Yeah, and Chicago's draft, I can't remember off the top of my head who they drafted, but I don't think anybody really jumped off the page. Chicago is weird. They're always just going to be kind of in the lower tiers just because they're just in such a bad position, and there's not really much to do unless they want to blow it up, but they aren't going to do that. They've expressed a million times they aren't going to do that. So you just kind of have to take it as it is, and yeah, C for sure. Cleveland, I think, had a really good offseason, actually. I don't think that many people are talking about Cleveland's offseason just because they kind of fizzled out in the playoffs, and I think that has kind of left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth about Cleveland. But I think Cleveland definitely deserves to be in an A. I still think there are some maybe long-term concerns with Cleveland, just about, kind of everything they have going on there, about Donovan Mitchell. A report came out about, we also talked about this in the last episode, so you can go back. I don't know. A lot of this is in the episodes already, but Cleveland, Tim Bontemps recently came out with a report saying that he doesn't really know if Donovan Mitchell is committed to Cleveland long-term, and if so, that's a little bit scary. Evan Mobley, offensive development, it's all up in the air. We just talked about it. Cleveland is in an A because I think that bringing in the players they did in Georges Niang and Max Strus are really going to help that wing depth. Isaac Okoro, he wasn't what Cleveland needed all the time last year. And even though Max Strus and Georges Niang won't fix everything, I think they will help. I think having guys who can hit open shots and I think are at least competent defensively. Like, they aren't going to be as good as Isaac Okoro, but you can kind of decide whether you want more defense or more shooting, whether you want to have Max Strus in the game or whether you want to have Isaac Okoro in the game. Also, they drafted Amani Bates in the late second round, who so far in Summer League has really impressed. I'm rooting for the guy. I think he can be a really good NBA player. Maybe never an all-star, maybe never like a future superstar like people think he was going to be kind of a few years ago. But Amani Bates is looking like a good pickup for them. They lost Chetty Osman. I don't know. I think Cleveland just had a really good offseason. It's nothing amazing, but I think it's pretty solid for what they wanted to get done. Dallas, however, I think did have a really good offseason. I would even consider putting Dallas up in S, but I'm not ready. I don't know if I'm ready to go there. Okay, we'll put them there for now, just because I think Dallas they did a lot of things right this offseason. I'm just thinking of what they added. They added Grant Williams, who I think will be a very, very, very huge piece of that team. A guy who can hit open shots, a guy who can defend, a guy who can, I think, has some playmaking potential that he hasn't really unlocked yet. I think bringing in Derek Lively through the draft was a really good move. They got rid of Bertans. They what else did they do? Christian Wood, I think they're fine with getting rid of. They brought in Rashawn Holmes from the Kings, who I think can act as a pick and roll partner with Luka and Kyrie. They brought back Kyrie for a pretty team friendly deal, all things considered. Also, I mean, he's making less than Fred VanVleet, which I think is a W for Dallas. Uh, yeah, Dallas has had a great offseason. I think a lot of things are really going to shore up over there for Dallas. And I wouldn't write them in as a playoff team just because the way they went out last year is I'm just thinking about that. And it's like, I don't really know if they did enough to really ascend them multiple tiers above the other teams in the West. But I think all things considered, you have to, if you're a Mavs fan, you have to be looking at this offseason and saying, I think we did something really good here. And I mean, with Dallas, I mean, it seems like Luka. I don't want to say his future is up in the air, but the clock is ticking before they need to start being competitive around Luka, and I think they're making steps in the right direction. So we'll see how their team looks this year. And then we've got Denver. Denver, like they'll be fine, right? Because they're Denver, but losing their sixth and seventh guy in the rotation, being Bruce Brown and Jeff Green, is going to really hurt them. I thought they were a pretty thin team the second half of last year, and especially in the playoffs. I think it kind of revealed that. Again, they were fine because their starting lineup was so good, and Bruce Brown and Jeff Green did what they did. But after those 7 or maybe 8 sometimes with Christian Brown, they didn't really have a lot of guys who they could trust with big minutes in the playoffs. I think letting or they didn't really let Bruce Brown walk because he was going to get more money somewhere else regardless. But losing those two guys, Bruce Brown and Jeff Green, regardless, is just it makes their team thinner. They brought back Reggie Jackson on that weird deal. Like I don't really know why they did that. They lost Thomas Bryant, which I think is fine for them also. But yeah, they drafted well, but I don't think those guys are going to be ready to do what Denver wants to do, and that's win a championship. Denver has to go in D for now. Maybe I'm being too harsh, but I'm looking at their offseason in a vacuum, and I can't say they had a very good offseason. And I can't say they even had like a okay offseason. I think they had a bad offseason. Then we've got Detroit. Detroit is like, I don't think they did anything super inoffensive, but I don't think they really hit any home runs either. If I had to pick anywhere for Detroit to go, I probably want to put Detroit like right here. I guess I kind of see them in the same vein as maybe Charlotte. I think they got Asar Thompson a bit high. I think they could have got him later if they had like traded down or something. But I mean, yeah, there's not too much to talk about with Detroit, if I'm being honest. I mean, they're kind of keeping on. They're holding on to a lot of their same guys who were on the team last year. They traded for Joe Harris. Oh, they also got Monte Morris for super cheap, who I think will help out. But yeah, they're still running with the same team of Cade, who I'm really excited to see a healthy season of, and they've got Jaden Ivey, who I think had a pretty underrated rookie season. They've got the two bigs and James Wiseman, Jalen Duren, Bogdanovich is still on the team. Killian Hayes is doing whatever he's doing. Marvin Bagley. The Pistons, I think, will be. I don't want to say. They aren't going to be. I don't think they're going to be in real contention for a play-in spot, but I think they're making good steps in the right direction, but nothing to really write home about with them. So I think B is a good spot. Golden State. I think Golden State has to go in C for me. And not really because I don't like the fit of Chris Paul on that team. I actually do like the fit of Chris Paul on that team. It gives them another dimension on the opposite side of the ball that I think they've been lacking for a few years now. Ever since Kevin Durant left the team, I think they've just been needing another style of offense to play, and I think Chris Paul gives them that. But I guess with Golden State, the reason I have them a little bit low is I just think it's unfortunate that they got to this point with Jordan Poole that they had to trade him, because I think for a long time it was looking like Jordan Poole was going to help bridge that gap from the old team to the new team. And even though Jordan Poole was frustrating at times, had I think took a step backwards in his fourth season from his third season. Losing Jordan Poole the way they did with the Draymond thing kind of getting rehashed, and like I don't know, just kind of bad vibes from Golden State a little bit. And they also lost Patrick Baldwin Jr. in that trade, who I think is going. I think is going to be a pretty good player, but I guess it's a little bit insignificant. They also lost Dante DiVincenzo, who I think helped them at times last year. He's on the Knicks now. We'll talk about them later. Bob Myers stepped down. Mike Dunleavy Jr. stepped up. They re-signed Draymond. Yeah, I don't know. Just kind of weird vibes from Golden State. We'll see how the season looks. Houston's also a weird team just because I thought they had a great draft, but didn't spend very well in free agency. I think Fred VanVleet's a fine signing, but Dylan Brooks for 4 years, $80 million is just kind of ridiculous in my opinion. Like that's way too much. I'm sorry. Houston. I think I don't want to go like I don't know. Maybe C, maybe B. I feel like B is right. I feel like B. Yeah, I don't want to ignore how good their draft was. I think Amen Thompson and Cam Whitmore are really good players to get your hands on like that in the draft where they got them. Amen Thompson at 4, who I think in most drafts would go higher, and then Cam Whitmore all the way at 20 is such a steal, despite the injury concerns. Yeah, I think Houston goes there for sure. And then we have Indiana, who I kind of want to put Indiana at S, but I'm going to put Indiana at A for now. Indiana, I think, spent their money great this offseason. Bruce Brown, big contract, but I think Bruce Brown's really going to help this team. They aren't ready to win right now, but we also saw that before Tyrese Halliburton got hurt last year, they were a pretty good team in the East. I mean, with Tyrese Halliburton running the show and running that high-paced, fast ball movement offense, I really think this team could be good again. And Bruce Brown kind of fits that play. He fits that style of play like super well. He really does. He's like routinely one of the best players in transition in the entire NBA, and also is a great screen setter and roller and can shoot occasionally. They also brought in Obi Toppin, who I think renewing his basketball lease, I think, is really good for him. He gets to go to a situation from New York where there's a lot of pressure to win right away and contribute right away, and he goes to a situation in Indiana where he can just kind of play within the offense, get in transition, play his game. I think Obi Toppin's going to be a great fit there. And they paid Tyrese Halliburton. They got what's his name? Not Case and Wallace, right? No, they got someone else. Someone else in the lottery. I'm just blanking on their name right now. I think he's going to be pretty good too. So Indiana has to go high. Clippers haven't committed any sins this offseason, but also it just feels like everybody in the West has kind of they've kind of moved up and kind of like I feel like the Clippers are being left behind, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They have just had a quiet offseason. Their draft selections are never going to be that great just because of their positioning in every draft. They're always going to draft pretty low. And I don't know. Kenyon Martin Jr. was a good acquisition, but they also lost Eric Gordon for nothing after they traded Luke Kennard to get him last year. Kawhi Leonard is extension eligible. We haven't really heard much about that. Los Angeles just kind of seems like a pot waiting to boil over. I guess I don't know. They're hard to rank because I'm trying to stay away from ranking their situation and just kind of be a little bit more objective with the moves they made in the offseason, but it just feels like they haven't really done that much. I think C is a good spot for them. LA or LAL, Los Angeles Lakers. I think deserve to be in an S. I think they spent fantastically. They brought in like pretty much all of the core guys that made last year's Western Conference Finals run possible. They brought in Austin Reeves on a very team-friendly deal. Rui Hachimura is back. D'Angelo Russell can still be a very high impact player on the offensive side, despite his own playoff struggles and tendencies to kind of be lackadaisical on the defensive end. He's still a great player, and I think they got him on a great contract. They brought in Gabe Vincent to also play point guard for them. A lot of the margin moves I think they made were really good. Torian Prince is a great player. It's going to help that team. They lost Malik Beasley, but I think Torian Prince can just kind of fill that same role. They brought in Cam Reddish, who, I mean, this is kind of the last chance for Cam Reddish to prove himself, but why not? I think he could add a nice element for that team. And yeah, they also brought in Jackson Hayes, who I think can occasionally run center by alongside Anthony Davis if they want to go with that kind of look. I just think LA had a great offseason. We also talked about them in our first episode of Soul Hoops. We talked about them. Yeah, they had a great offseason in my opinion. But we have Memphis. I think Memphis deserves not A, but probably also B. I don't know. I think B is fine for now. They are in a tough spot this offseason because they have to navigate the offseason with Ja Morant's suspension in mind, right? They know he's not going to be there for the first 25 games of the season, and they had to respond accordingly. And I think for the most part, they did. I think Marcus Smart is just a great addition to that team. He fits everything they're trying to do. He really is going to embody that culture and make it strong, make it competitive. They lost Dylan Brooks, which I think is a good look for that team. I think they just didn't really need him around anymore. He had a pretty bad offensive season, despite, I mean, his defense is really good, right? But the offense was pretty hard to watch last year. And also, he kind of embarrassed himself and the entire team in the playoffs, which I think they didn't really like that look, and they just wanted to get rid of him, which I think is completely fine. They also brought in Derrick Rose to kind of be in that bench point guard. Maybe, I don't know if he's going to be the full backup one, but I certainly think he can still be impactful on the court and in the locker room. They lost Tyus Jones, which is a tough loss, but Marcus Smart is going to be great in that team. Brandon Clark is still injured, which sucks. I don't know. Grizzlies, again, tough spot to be in, but I think they really made the most out of it. Then we've got the Miami Heat, and I created this other tier down here just especially for the Heat, and then one other team that I think deserve to be here, because whether the Heat's offseason ends up being like a D or C or an S entirely depends on whether they get Damian Lillard or not. It's not exactly a secret that the Heat want Dame and Dame wants to go to the Heat. It's just Portland thinks they can get a better offer from another team, which is true. Like there are some other teams in here, I think, like Utah, maybe Brooklyn if they're still interested. New Orleans could put an offer together. Those offers are all better than Miami's, and I think the Trailblazers are still waiting. They're still waiting to see if any other team is going to try to get involved. But yeah, I mean, I would say the most likely scenario is still Dame to the Heat. But, because it hasn't happened yet, we can't really rank them. I feel like they deserve to be in their own kind of section down here. Then we have the Milwaukee Bucks. And I think I've been seeing some takes about the Bucks offseason on Twitter of people saying that they had a bad offseason, that they are just running it back with a team that doesn't work. And I just really disagree with that. I think the Milwaukee Bucks had a pretty fine offseason. I don't know if I'd say like a pretty good offseason. I think they're just kind of in the middle. I don't think they did anything that was too bad. They let Javon Carter go, which I think is fine. They brought in Malik Beasley, who I think is going to be a very underrated player for them. They re-signed Brook Lopez, which I think was an awesome get. Losing Brook Lopez, I think would really hurt that team defensively, and I think that would really impact, maybe Giannis's long-term potential with that team. I don't really know for sure. They brought back Chris Middleton on a pretty team-friendly deal. It was announced yesterday that they brought back Thanasis Antetokounmpo. They brought in Robin Lopez. Yeah, I think Milwaukee's offseason was really fine. Like, I don't think it was too bad. I actually really like the Malik Beasley move again. I think that he can really help them. Then we have Minnesota. I think Minnesota also kind of goes into a B. I think they had a pretty quiet offseason compared to what happened last year, obviously. With Minnesota, I think it's important that they just go into this next season with continuity. Making another big time trade, like trading Cat, for example, I really think would just kind of mess things up all over again and cause them to figure it out all over again, which I just think was a problem last year. And I don't know. Minnesota retaining Naz Reid was a really big get. I think that was a great guy to keep around. Nickeil Alexander-Walker was super impactful for them at the end of last year. They also got Shake Milton, who can kind of cover some of those backup point guard minutes. And they also got Troy Brown Jr., who can shoot and defend to kind of fill some of that wing depth. So they also drafted pretty well. I think getting Leonard Miller, where they got him in the draft, second round, 33rd pick, really one of the steals of the whole draft. So Minnesota goes there. New Orleans. So New Orleans, I think also goes B. I think a lot of teams are kind of in B. I think the teams that were kind of quiet all kind of go in B. I don't know. We'll see what these teams down here. But New Orleans, I mean, the biggest question for them is always going to be, will Zion play? And we've only seen, out of the 4 seasons Zion's been in the league, we've only seen one season where he's been like relatively healthy, and that's his second season, and he was great. He was an all-star, 27 points per game, all of that. But whether the Pelicans are good or not next year entirely depends on what Zion is going to look like as far as will he be available. They brought back Herb Jones on a pretty team-friendly deal. I think they did pretty well in the draft. Jordan Hawkins had maybe a rough summer league, but I think he can really turn things around and make shots. He's just a natural shooter. I think he'll be fine right at the gate. They're also just kind of running it back with the same starting lineup, which I think is a little bit, I don't know about weird, but it's bold considering how their season ended up, I guess. I kind of was wishing they'd do a little bit more, maybe. Yeah, New Orleans. It's hard. It's weird. It's super weird. Yeah, I think B is fine. Yeah, B. They didn't really do anything that's like too inoffensive, I think, to warrant them being down with a C. I think all these teams did things that are a little bit like, But Knicks. I think Knicks also might go into a B. I'm trying to think about what the Knicks really, if they didn't really shake things up much. I think they kept like pretty much most of the same team. They lost Obi Toppin to the Pacers. I think that will kind of hurt. I think they're gonna look back at that and realize I think they let a pretty good player go. They brought in Dante DiVincenzo, which adds more depth at the guard position. They got rid of they let Derrick Rose walk, who didn't ever play for them anyway. Yeah, I think the Knicks, for a team like the Knicks that overachieved last season, I don't really think it was that imperative that they did anything that was too groundbreaking for next season. I keep on bumping my mic. I'm sorry if that comes through on the audio. And then we have the Thunder. Thunder. I think if you look at the Thunder's offseason in a vacuum, I think it's okay to put them maybe at a, I don't want to say C, because they didn't do anything bad, but they didn't really do anything good. I think they had a pretty quiet offseason. I think they also just go in B. A lot of these teams just go in B just because You know, with the new CBA, I think it limits a lot of. I think it limits teams from doing anything that's too crazy, maybe in the off season, as far as wanting to go all in for big trades or wanting to just like hand out giant contracts to big name free agents. I don't know. I think a lot of teams just will just go and be Orlando. You see, Orlando is just set up for success right now, and I also don't think they had a lot of pressure to have a giant splash of an offseason, similar to the Thunder in a lot of ways. They've got Joe Ingles, who can be like a good veteran shooter for that team. They drafted Anthony Black and Jet Howard, two guys who I think are going to be pretty good. Anthony Black, especially. I don't know if those two are going to play right away. I'm betting on probably not, just because the Magic have a lot of players that need to play. And I would just say Magic. I don't want to put them on B because like a ton of teams are in B. Someone's got to move up. Someone has to. I don't know which team to move up though. Hmm. I don't know. We'll wait for it. Philly. Philly is a lot like the Clippers, but their situation is even more dire. I'm putting them in D. I'm sorry. They didn't even do anything that bad this offseason. I mean, actually, they kind of did. They let Jalen McDaniels walk. They let Georges Niang go. They let Shake Milton go, which, yeah, they're thinner than they were last year. Um, James Harden requested a trade. They don't know what to do about that. Harden only wants to go to one team, and that's the Clippers. But the Clippers package like isn't going to save. It's not going to really satisfy the Sixers that much, in my opinion, because the window to win like with Joel Embiid as your best player is right now, because he's in the prime of his career. He's not getting any younger. His style of play raises injury concerns long term. Philly is just a pot waiting to boil over. And out of any team in the NBA, I don't think there is a team with more question marks regarding their present or future than the Sixers. They're just I don't know what to do about them. And then the Suns. I think Suns have to go in S. Suns, I don't know what S. Maybe A. A. The Bradley Beal trade is bold. It was very, very, very bold. And I don't know if I completely subscribe to that idea of how it's going to work over there. They also got rid of Campaign. They traded him to the Spurs, who I think can be pretty good there. We'll talk about them in a minute, but they don't have any true point guards in the roster, um, which I think prevents them from going into S because that raises some concerns. But I mean, at the end of the day, you have Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant in the same team, and that's it's just remarkable. I mean, you've got to respect that, and also I think they nailed like a lot of the margin moves, bringing Yuta Watanabe, Eric Gordon. They got Drew Eubanks. I think they got some other pretty solid players off that kind of veteran minimum style of contract. Um, Again, the Bradley Beal trade is just kind of what it is, and yeah, I think Suns have to go in A. I don't know about S, but A for sure. And then Portland. Portland also has to go and need more time. We just don't know what the Dame package is going to look like yet, and therefore they have to go and need more time. We just don't know. We just have no idea. Sacramento Kings. They didn't really do that much other than bring back all their guys, which I think is fine because they were a really good team last year. They almost beat the Warriors in the first round. But I think there's a ceiling on how good this Kings team can be, and I think they hit it last year. So it's a little bit risky to just to run it back completely almost and be like, we're gonna be fine. We're gonna be just as good again. I just think it's risky. They did get Chris Duarte and they let Rashawn Holmes go, but that's like a super minor move that I don't think will impact them much at all. I don't know. I think Kings. mm, yeah, I think Kings will go into a C. Yeah, I was kind of disappointed. I was kind of hoping that they use their money um, and spend on a little bit more than what they did. And then we have San Antonio. San Antonio goes into A. I just think they do. Um, Adding the best prospect in the last 20 years to their team um, really helps them out as far as the rankings go. Um, I just think they had a great offseason. They're finally taking the first major steps into setting themselves up for success long term. They've got a great young core. I think this summer really helped cement that. Campaign to run the backup point guard role is going to be really nice for that team. Just kind of gives them a veteran presence, which is weird to say because campaign veteran presence is just kind of like weird. I don't know. Because if you watched him in like 2017, you know why it's weird. Then we have Toronto. I just like, yeah, I think Toronto has to go and see. They're not really running it back because Fred VanVleet is gone. They brought in Dennis Schroeder. They brought in Jalen McDaniels. They brought in they drafted Grady Dick, who I think is gonna be pretty good. But overall, like the outlook of this team going forward doesn't really change, and it honestly just kind of looks a little bit worse, maybe because Siakam is still on the team and OG is still on the team, and I don't think they're going to get moved this offseason. But I mean, yeah, I just don't know. I think they really deserve to go and see. I could honestly hear arguments for D or maybe B. I feel like a lot of these teams could potentially go up or down a tier depending on the day. But I think as of right now, I'm feeling pretty good about most of these. And then we've got Utah. Utah might also go. I don't like Utah. I just look at their team and I just can't help but ignore the giant hole they have at point guard. Taylor Horton Tucker and Colin Sexton are not great options for a starting point guard, and that's kind of what they have to run with next year. So they didn't really fill any positional needs in that regard. I think John Collins was actually a pretty good acquisition. Actually, I'm going to move them up. I think I'm being a little bit too harsh. John Collins, getting him for what they gave up, you might as well just take it. I think they drafted pretty well. They got Keontae George, and they also got Taylor Hendricks, obviously, who I think is going to be really, really good. Yeah, they don't have a lot of playmaking in that team, which kind of worries me. I don't know. Utah is kind of what they are. Again, not a lot of pressure to do anything drastic right now, but just kind of looking at their offseason, they just kind of had a whatever offseason. And then the Wizards. I'm proud of the Wizards for finally just doing it. I might put them in A. Actually, no, I can't put them in A. I have to put them in B. Just because the time to trade Beal and Porzingis was 2 years ago, and they waited super long, and they got like a fraction of the value they could have otherwise gotten. Jordan Poole, great move. Tyus Jones, great move. They re-signed Kyle Kuzma for a lot, which I think is fine. Yeah, I don't know. I think Washington had a fine offseason. Let's see. Is there anything I'd change? I think I'm being too harsh on Sacramento. I think I moved them up. But what this creates is like there's a lot of teams in B. I think this is fine. I think I feel good about this. Yeah, I do. So let me go back to StreamYard. Anyway, I think that was successful. I think we ranked all the teams based on how their offseason went. And yeah, I mean, there's still time left technically in the offseason, right? Like right now it's Sunday, July 30th, right? So there's still all of August, all of September for Dame stuff to happen, James Harden stuff to happen. There's still some free agents that are kind of holding out extensions to be given out. And like maybe like they're like a lot of these teams could potentially get involved in some sort of multi-team trade for Dame or James Harden, and that could change things for all these teams. But as of right now, as of July 30th, um, this is where I personally have all these teams. Um, so yeah, let me know what you guys think about my rankings in the comments or on Twitter or really anywhere. I definitely want to hear what you guys think about my placements because I'm definitely open to hearing. Um, I'm open to debate about a lot of these. Yeah, I want to see where you guys are coming from with a lot of these teams. If I ranked your favorite team too low, I really want to hear why. Just because I like getting that perspective from fan bases themselves, and then comparing that to my outsider perspective for a lot of these teams. So, yeah, I think that about wraps it up. Um, this video will probably come out on Monday, July 31st, and we will continue with the positional rankings the next week. Not this week, but next week. We'll be back to the small forward rankings after that.